oh my God, I see this country transforming from 1 billion people on bicycles to probably what's going to become the largest automobile market in the world. What are we going to do about that? When you say to me 500 million people are watching Formula E, well then I think this is the biggest sustainability platform on the planet. And no one's watching it because they want to solve climate change, but they are watching a format that is completely aligned with the solution for climate change. That is powerful. You will electrify not because you want to electrify, but because it actually raises your quality of life. I think that we are not in this age of dawning awareness that we have a problem. I think we're in the age of adoption.
Most modern.
I've been thinking about something that kind of bugs me. Why does every conversation about climate feel like we're being asked to give something up? What if that's completely backwards? What if the real story is that climate change solutions are actually making life better, not worse? Today, I'm talking with Josh Dorfman, who hosts a popular podcast, Supercool, and has been tracking the entrepreneurs and innovations that are quietly revolutionizing how we live more sustainably. This isn't about sacrifice or guilt. It's actually about the practical reality of what cities and daily life could look like when climate tech actually works. And here's what I discovered. We actually might be already closer to that future than we already realize. So let's dig in. Josh Dorfman, welcome to Most Modern.
Thank you so much, Alex. Great to be here.
We've been talking about sustainability, climate for a long time. I remember An Inconvenient Truth came out when I was in high school. Why does it feel like, despite the fact that we're always talking about this, not a lot of change is happening? And how do we get over that?
Yeah, I would say 3 things. First, the timescales don't align. We have brains that have been developed, right, over hundreds of thousands of years. If the lion took 30 years to cross that, grassy plain to get to the caveman, we might think in a timescale to solve climate change. But our brain adapts only and sees fear and danger only when it's right in front of us, about to eat us. And climate change takes a long time to solve, right? So we are not mentally, right? Our brains actually, we're not wired as humans to contend with challenges that take place over decades to actually solve. That's one, I think that's pretty obvious. Mm-hmm. 2, I think that awareness gets raised, and certainly Al Gore's movie came out in 2006. That was a really interesting moment. The movement starts to build around sustainability. We need change. Even if there weren't headwinds, right? Even if there weren't a fossil fuel industry that would do whatever it can take to slow that down, right? And they can do a lot. Even if we wanted to move as quickly as possible, you're building awareness, which is relatively easy to build. What's much harder to build is infrastructure and systems and things that take a long time to change. I had a conversation recently with Tim Holt, who's in charge of grid technologies for Siemens Energy, one of the biggest global energy companies in the world. What he said to me was, Josh, look, no CEO of a utility is going to get fired because they're not innovative enough. They will get fired if the power goes out too often. And so you are dealing with grids and infrastructure and things that people want to change, that are core to the future we need to go to. But it just takes more time. And that's that momentum, that sustainability, that drive for a more sustainable world, you have to get that to sustain as these huge systems also need to evolve as well. And then the third thing I would say is that it is actually moving pretty fast, and that all the sustainability talk is actually starting to catch up to a lot of action. And so on the one hand, there's the dynamics I laid out. On the other, 2024, $2 trillion was invested globally in clean energy technologies. It's going to be $2.2 trillion, at least that's how we're pacing in 2025. It's almost doubling fossil fuels now on an annual basis. And so that's EVs, that's solar, that's batteries, that's a whole suite of other technologies. The proverbial train has absolutely left the building, but because a lot of this does happen in the background or in a desert with thousands of acres of solar panels and now batteries attached to it or just kind of out of sight, we don't always see the progress that's actually underway.
Maybe on a personal level, was there a moment where you specifically said, wow, something really does need to change, or something is changing and I personally want to get in and be a part or kind of document or record the sustainability movement that's happening?
Well, there's definitely been some different pivotal moments in my life, career, journey, whatever you want to say, in terms of sustainability and climate. I mean, for me, 1997, I was living in China. I was traveling the country as a bicycle lock salesperson for Kryptonite Bike Locks, creator of the original U-shaped bike lock.
Iconic,
and
yes.
Iconic, yes, iconic design. It was iconic design. And we were opening a factory in southern China. I was traveling with the Chinese guy who was going to be our partner to this restaurant we were going to celebrate. We're in his Mercedes. We get to this parking lot. All the cars are Mercedes. We're about to go in and consummate this deal, toast in Baijiu, which is basically grain alcohol, and a little bit of snake blood, and that's how they do it in southern China, or at least that's how they did it. But before we went in, this guy said to me, "Josh, look, my Mercedes is the biggest Mercedes in the parking lot." And his chest swelled up with pride, and I'd been there for 2 years, and I suddenly thought, oh my God, I've seen the bridges, the tunnels, the highways. I see this country transforming from 1 billion people on bicycles to probably what's going to become the largest automobile market in the world, because everybody wants what we have in America. Mm-hmm. What are we going to do about that? And so, that was a moment where I suddenly started to feel like I was seeing the future. Now, it was long before there was anything to chronicle. There just wasn't actually a lot happening at that moment to affect change. You could go march and protest, maybe, but the solutions weren't readily clear, right? Mm-hmm. But that was a moment where I really knew that eventually that my life course was going to be to think about how do we enable not just China or Eastern Europe or continue to enable in America people to raise their quality of life, live as well as they possibly can, while bringing their lifestyles into balance with nature's ecosystems and the ability to be sustained, and enable future generations to do the same. The moment when I wanted to start chronicling what was happening, that took place, I would say 2004, 2005. I started a company called Vivavi. It was a Viva V, like live life, and it became this modern design, sustainable furniture company. And it eventually became a couple of showrooms in New York City. I lived in my Brooklyn showroom for like 4 years. That was also quite a thing. But what I felt at the time was I didn't have a huge marketing budget. I was going to try to grow this company the way Richard Branson grows his companies. I wasn't going to jump out of an airplane, but I might if I had the opportunity, if that would shine a spotlight, if I could take the spotlight from me and pivot it to my companies. And I was offered the opportunity to do a radio show called The Lazy Environmentalist, which was about me being actually a very terrible environmentalist, even though I was selling all this eco-friendly stuff, which my first employee pointed out to me. And I gravitated toward that because I loved telling the stories of what was happening, not just in my business, but with the designers I was meeting, other innovators, just being really curious about what's out there. How do you bring these types of solutions to market? How do you build this kind of economy? So
were a lot of people at the time talking about the environmental movement, about sustainability at that moment?
No, but it was a fun moment because what was happening, this was 2004, 2005. This was pre-Al Gore's movie. And what was starting to happen was that there were people around the country, artisans, designers, different types of designers, industrial designers, furniture designers, who were wanting to start to have a different sense of what sustainability could mean, right? They wanted to have this ethos was changing. There was something kind of, I don't know, call it in the water, I don't know, but you had people all over the country saying, hey, I want sustainable products, but I don't want like twigs wrapped in rope and called a seat. I actually want something that's beautiful, well-designed, and all sustainable. And it just started happening everywhere. And I moved up to Brooklyn from Washington, D.C. I quit a PhD program in political science to start this company. There was no community in D.C. for design, let alone sustainable design. So I moved up to Brooklyn, and at the time, the most popular blog covering this whole thing was Tree Hugger. It was ironic, but a guy, Graham Hill, called it Tree Hugger. And I connected with Graham, and he invited me to a party at his loft in Soho, and I showed up, and here were all of these architects and cool New Yorkers and tech people who are all interested in green. And I thought, oh yes, this is what I've been searching for. This is still small, this is really niche, but this is where I want to be. This is the energy. And I think what's cool, what I've thought about, you can't always predict it, but I think about if you were in Paris, when Gertrude Stein was holding her salons, and you were an author, and you probably felt you were in the center of the universe. You were in the perfect place at the right time, right? It was the scene, yeah. Right? It was, and I kind of thought about that because I felt like New York that time, 2004, 2005, 2006, probably right up until the Great Recession, had that energy. You felt like you were where something new was being born, and so much creativity was going into it. So it wasn't a huge movement, but the energy behind it was incredibly, incredibly exciting.
That's really fascinating. I think what you're talking about is this moment where maybe sustainability became cool. I mean, to use your own parlance right now as you stay cool in the background, but like you're saying, it wasn't just granola sustainability. It was like sustainable and good, sustainable and quality, sustainable and cool.
Yeah, we had this, I used to joke that, when people would say, how do you decide what you're going to carry on Vivavi? And we had really beautiful contemporary modern design, all made from environmentally friendly materials. I would just say we have this kind of burlap sack filter, right? If something looks too much like it pays homage to a burlap sack, it's just never going to be something that we're going to sell. We're trying to do something that's way different than what's crunchy granola, all that stuff. And I was at this thing in 2004. I remember in San Francisco. It was called a Green Festival, and you'd bring vendors together who were kind of the early vanguard of this stuff. And we had a poster, a billboard or something that said, "Green is the new black," right? And it was such a head scratcher for that audience. People are just like, I don't understand. Like, what that sounds vaguely racist. I don't know. What are you saying? So, yeah, it was an interesting time. I think that is when things began to shift.
Should have turned it into a Netflix show. You would have been really successful.
Yeah. If only Netflix existed.
But is that, you're talking about Brooklyn, you're talking about New York, you're talking about San Francisco. Those are very niche markets, very specific places. In the years since, do you think sustainability has gotten to the point where it is cool, where it is something that is attractive, or is it something we're still working on getting to?
It's an interesting way to put it. If I were going to say, is sustainability cool, I would just point you toward companies like Reformation, fashion brands like Reformation, which are incredibly cool and amazing design, amazing fashion, worn by everybody. You can go on any page look at any product, and they'll tell you its carbon footprint. Like they'll tell this company is so committed to pointing and showing the industry what the future can be, right? So there are plenty of examples like that where, yes, is it cool? I think just it can be. You can find examples of what you want to say. You can look at the most beautiful buildings in the world. Many of them are designed with a sustainable ethos, right? Like that's increasingly how architects want to design. But what I look at that I think is more important than cool, the question that I'm asking today is sustainability profitable? Because if it's profitable, then it's going to scale. Right? Because if it's profitable, that probably means something about it is cool, right? Something is resonating, and we live in our capitalist society where, that almost trumps everything else. And so, I look at solutions today, and I think they're incredibly elegant. I think they're saving businesses money. I think they're making cities more beautiful, just as they're also either raising the tax base for cities or driving economic development. I think that's cool. But more than that, it actually works for how people want to live. So what I would say, what is sustainability doing today? It's upgrading how we live. It's improving modern life. That's really what matters. And it's driving profits for the companies and decision makers who need to, who control a lot of dollars.
Yeah, we were talking off camera a little bit about how there was a moment when sustainability, regardless if it was cool or not, the argument for it was more moralistic. It was more about ethics and doing the right thing. But it seems like you're trying to get to maybe a more sustainable way of promoting sustainability, which is go to where the market is, make sure it's profitable, make sure it's cheaper, make sure it's something that people can afford and choose over the less sustainable option. Is that a good way of describing it?
Yeah, and I think the best way to kind of understand that is maybe just by a couple of examples. We talked with this guy recently, on our platform, Supercool. This guy Al Sabloui, his company's Butterfly, right? Buddderfly. And Al actually didn't come out of the sustainability movement, but he worked with a lot of small businesses. He, kind of SaaS software type models of business. He understood the small business market. And then he started looking at energy and he said, you know what? I can go to a Popeyes or a Wendy's, or I can go to all of these main street businesses, these franchises, and I can literally make them an offer that they can't refuse, right? I will go to that old Popeyes and I will tell them, look, I'll upgrade your refrigeration, I'll upgrade your lights, I'll upgrade all of the systems in this restaurant that use tons of energy, and I'll do it for free. Because I can make the economics work, and then we'll share in the savings. I'll take the majority of the savings, you'll get upgraded equipment and a much better experience, and we're both going to win here, and the climate's going to win, right? Because we're going to cut energy use, and we're going to cut carbon footprints, and you don't even really have to do anything at all, right? Like, that's kind of ingenious. That's sort of like sexy energy efficiency, and so we have this like sexy energy efficiency thing going on right now in buildings where it's almost invisible. There's just so many different models where this is integrating in a way where it's easy for people to say yes because the economics work. I think that's probably more how I would frame it.
You talk to a lot of people in this space, working out all these different scales from changing a light bulb to adding wind power generating infrastructure in large swaths of land or over the sea, or solar panels or things of that nature. I think a lot of people have an image of what sustainability is, and it's probably different for every single person. But can you maybe tell us a little bit about what the average person is missing when it comes to the clean energy revolution? What are the advancements and innovations that are happening right now?
So this probably comes back to the beginning of this conversation, Alex, where I think a lot is happening that is just, it's out of sight because it is this, it's energy, it's what's happening on the grid. But if you look at, solar today, right? People still, and I know when I talk to my friends, they're like, oh, okay, you're doing this. You do you, Josh. You do this environmental thing. Most of us don't. Like, should I really be thinking about solar? I got this guy knocking on my door. And I'm like, well, maybe you should. I guess I can't tell you whether you should or shouldn't, but I can tell you that utilities are, because the price of solar has dropped by 99% over the last 50 years. And it's just, it follows the law of learning curves, right? So every time manufacturing doubles, the price of solar drops by pretty much a standard percentage over time. So you get to this place where solar is almost, the cost of solar and electricity is almost trivial. If you project this curve out another decade, you get to a place where the implications are almost hard to believe, right? You get to a place where desalinization suddenly starts to actually look like it makes economic sense, where solving for name your challenge, global food security, like everything starts to become viable. And this cost curve that no one's really looking at is moving in this direction. I was talking to this guy, David Roberts, who's a clean energy journalist about it, who's covered this area for 20 years. He said to me he can't get anyone to model it because if you actually model what's going to happen in a decade, you look like you're insane. The findings are hard to believe. And then storage is happening, batteries are happening along the same, very similar declining curve in cost. So just between 2023 and 2024, batteries declined in cost by 40%, which meant that if you were going to install solar and batteries on the grid, the cost went down in, between 2023 to 24 by 22% in just 1 year. And so what we're not seeing is actually the deployment of all of these technologies around the world. And today, in many regions of the world, this actually a study just came out last month, because batteries have gotten so cheap, the criticism of solar and the criticism of wind is that they only work when the sun's shining or the wind's blowing. But now, because batteries are so cheap, in many parts of the world, you can actually use solar energy 24/7 because you can store enough of it in the batteries to run it at night. All of this is happening out of sight. People have no idea, but if you look at the growth curves, right, on these S curves, as you start to see, well, where are we on the curve? It quickly becomes something that starts to take over. It's just, there is a revolution happening that sounds crazy to talk about, but that's why this is $2 trillion of investment every year now globally. I mean, it's literally everywhere.
Have you ever wondered why housing is so expensive, why traffic never improves, and why new buildings all look the same? If you're trying to make sense of how the built environment actually works and what could make it better, make sure to subscribe to Most Modern on YouTube or your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. If today's discussion resonates with you, give us a like, drop a comment, share the episode, and help us push the conversation forward.
Most modern.
I think the solar example is really good because we can all envision it. I mean, I'm looking out my window here. There's a library down the street that's installed solar. I don't know how much of their power they get from it, but they went through the effort to do it. Meanwhile, nobody else has solar. But we know what solar panels look like. Let's imagine that solar keeps on going on this downward trend in terms of cost, and it gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to the point that it's actually the cheapest way to produce electricity. What's it going to take for people to adopt? Because I do get your idea that, yeah, if it's cheaper and it's an easy alternative, people will go for it. But at the same time, when it comes to the built environment, legislation, permitting, all those other soft costs that get involved also make it difficult to implement. So what's it going to take for us to actually, I guess, get the picture and then start to transition to some of these cleaner energy sources?
Well, I guess what I would say is that people aren't going to get the picture. And the really nice thing about that is no one has to get the picture, because what the future is going to look like is an energy grid, right, which we have today, and more and more energy in our lives is going to flow through that grid. Today, it's about 20% of all energy in America flows through those wires, those transmission lines. But when there's more EVs, right, getting plugged in, that means you're going from, instead of filling up at the gas station, you're filling up in a garage or at your house or somewhere else, plugging into the grid. And the grid itself is going to be adding more renewables again, but most of that may happen out of sight. What you're going to do in your building or in your apartment or in your house is you are going to be increasingly electrifying everything that's in your home. Now, a climate, let's say, advocate would say, we must electrify to solve climate change, right? This is what we have to do. We just have to electrify everything in our house, everything in our buildings, and then put all this renewable energy on the grid so all the clean energy comes into us. Okay, well, that's all well and good, but nobody wakes up in the morning and says, you know what I really want to do today? I really want to electrify my house, right? This is the point. It's because no one really also says, you know what? Most people aren't saying, I really want my own energy supply on my roof. That's not how most people necessarily think. But if the induction stove has a battery in it and it's electric and it actually cooks better than gas or anything else, and you keep hearing about it and the price goes down and you go to your friend's house for a dinner and the meal's awesome, you're going to start buying those, and those exist because it's better, right? Yeah. And if the heat pump is a better way to cool your house and heat your house, right? And it saves you money, you're going to do that. You will electrify not because you want to electrify, but because it actually raises your quality of life. It comes back to the same thing we talked about in the beginning. The cost is worth it for the improvement you get in your life. You electrify. No one's going to be thinking necessarily, I am motivated to. Very few people, I should say. I am motivated to electrify to save the planet. Forget it. That's tiny. But the idea of saying, gosh, all the best things in the world are actually, they're electric. They're not natural gas anymore. They're not. It's that's where we're going to go, and then it's going to work.
So you're saying it needs to be like a cultural imperative. If you want to have a good quality of life, if you want to have the best kitchen, the best car, the best this or that, it's going to be that product. That's how we get there. I find that we're in this moment right now where some people are changing their minds. I think especially if you skew younger, people are starting to see, okay, there's opportunities here. There's certain products that are better and more innovative and sometimes cheaper too. But at the same time, for instance, I live in California. I do architecture work here. There's also this legal imperative. Actually, it feels like the state is the one that's often telling us, you must do this. For instance, in San Francisco, all new buildings have to be electrified, no gas appliances at all. Now, there's good and bad to that. I think the idea is good. I think the motivation is good, but it also makes things difficult. You have to go through a whole new set of documents that you have to sign off on. You have to go do all these check off all these lists, and sometimes it is more expensive, in fact. So where do you stand on that sort of policy that not necessarily incentivizes, but actually mandates that you move forward? How does that play into this role of transitioning?
Well, I would say I am a million times in favor of it, because what I think that ultimately does lead to is some pain, but then the market adjusts too. And so and you've probably seen some of these products, but if you look at what's happening in terms of Windows today and some of the innovation that's happening in terms of Windows, where Windows will be able to filter out heat from coming into a building, but bring in light, right? And they can adjust kind of autonomously using AI throughout the day. Now that's still expensive. It's in some probably more iconic buildings today where budgets are bigger and they're, right? But as those types of things get to more scale, of course, the cost starts to come down. There's always a policy in place that sets the market, right? There is actually no such thing as a free market. There are always rules. I think there's a way to do it though, Alex, that can be smoother, that can potentially be a transition. And I'll just give you an example in a different industry. But in France and Japan today, there's something operating called Loop. Now this is a reuse system that operates in their grocery stores, like in Carrefour, the biggest grocery store chain, one of the biggest in the world, but in France, and they also do it in Argentina now, where when you go to buy your Coca-Cola or your hundreds of consumer products, the packaging that you buy it in, you actually pay a little bit of a deposit, and then you bring that packaging back, and it's designed now to be reused multiple times over and over and over again, and it's run by a company called TerraCycle. It's an American company. And so what does that mean for the packaging? Well, the packaging gets a better budget, right? Because it's now just don't just make the cheapest thing possible that's going to get thrown away. So the design of the packaging actually starts to look better. It actually becomes more functional. And companies are starting to see that it's actually cheaper to design for reuse, not in every instance, but in a lot of instances in consumer packaged goods in France, than it is for just disposable packaging. Now the reason why is because it is actually a combination of rules and incentives that are moving companies in this direction. It's not an all at once, but those rules and incentives that set the market actually enable behavior that everybody loves. I mean, the CPG companies like it because they actually, if they're going to save money and they design a better product, consumers like it. And they tested this thing. They tested Loop in Canada, in the US, in the UK, France, and Japan. Everywhere they tested it, in the US I think it was with Kroger, consumers loved it. But it didn't stick in the US because the rules and incentives weren't in place to start to reinforce that behavior and build this market from the ground up. And so I'm not just in favor of dictatorial, it's more just sort of like top down, this is the mandate, everybody do it now. But I do think you can phase things in and set the rules in such a way that you do get to better outcomes over time, and those outcomes can be incredibly exciting.
You touch on these different places, Japan and France. Who's doing sustainability best right now? It doesn't seem like it's the Americans, but I know, for instance, in Europe, it's a major priority. China right now as well is really prioritizing it. Based on your global understanding, what's the lay of the land in terms of sustainability on a global stage?
So I think from a scale perspective, there's no question that everything flows through China at this point, whether it's wind energy, solar energy, electric vehicles. It's the biggest market in the world for all of those things by far, not even close. China controls, depending on what aspect of it, but up to 90% of rare earth metals and rare earth magnets, which you need not just for wind turbines, but for MIR machines, for all sorts of machines that really underpin civilization. So just from a pure scale perspective, right, of course it's China. If you look at it from more of a integration into everyday life, there's no question it's Europe, and it's in different ways. You look at Norway, and what's happening there in terms of electric vehicle adoption is mind-boggling. I mean, it's like almost 99%. I don't have the
like EVs.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Yeah. If you look at Denmark and what they're doing in terms of land use, recognizing that land use is so important to actually keeping carbon emissions down, and how we actually farm and do ag in a way where we're still being really responsible. There's no question it's Denmark. If you look at some of those countries in terms of bikes and underground parking garages and infrastructure, like it's unbelievable. What's actually interesting to me, I was listening to I think it was honestly, I think it was Barry Weiss's podcast. I don't know if you ever listened to that. She had
Free
on,
press, yeah.
it was on Free Press, and it was about the MAHA movement, the Robert Kennedy Make America Healthy Again. Yeah. And so this MAHA movement, which is still comprised of like a lot of MAGA. So I'm listening to this conversation and I'm hearing these kind of like MAGA moms complaining that we're, from a food perspective, that we're not enough like Denmark, right? Denmark, there's only 400 ingredients that are actually food. That's the only thing that can be in their food. America, we have 10,000. We don't even test them. The FDA doesn't even, it only becomes illegal if enough people actually get sick, right? Why don't you, and I'm sitting there, I'm listening to this, I'm like, wait a second. We've got MAGA moms who want America to be more like Denmark? What is happening? This is amazing. And so, I think we are in this interesting cultural, civilizational moment where kind of systems and walls and like the way we self-identify, I think a lot of this is sort of unraveling, and it's forming like these weird associations. Now, I don't know that the MAHA movement looks at Denmark and says, wow, man, look at that place. They're so sustainable. We need to be more sustainable. But it comes back to this conversation we're having, right? They look at it, they're like, dang, they eat food. What do we eat? We eat stuff grown in labs, and it's not even food, right? We want what they want. Now, of course, that is about sustainability, but it's wrapped in a message that's resonating with new audiences, right? In my mind, new audiences that don't self-identify as environmentalists, but they want the thing that environmentalists want too, right? So China, Europe, but that awareness and where it might go next, hard to predict.
So a couple of questions. I guess the next one would be, what can America learn from some of these places? What are they doing correctly? Or what can we do under our circumstances, under our infrastructure, to actually be maybe not as sustainable or just like those places, but start to push our own sustainability a little bit more hard?
So I do think it comes back to, I think a lot of this will take place in cities. I think we have to stop thinking about, or maybe we start recognizing that in cities that solutions they don't exist in silos, that systems are more interconnected, whether it's our streets and our waste and the infrastructure. I mean, you see, one of the most exciting companies that I've spoken to in the last year is this company called NVAC, E-N-V-A-C. It's a Swedish company. And NVAC in the 1950s invented a system to remove garbage from a city through, Jetsons like pneumatic tubes below the streets, right? And one of the first systems, and it was actually installed at Disney World in the 1970s, just after it opened, because the people running Disney, I don't think it was Walt Disney at the time, he may have been gone, but they thought, no one should see trash at this magical Disney World place. We're going to run it out of these pneumatic tubes. Well, today, in most major cities, including New York City, from Beijing to Singapore to Barcelona to London to Mecca has one of these very large systems. Trash is actually sent out below ground through pneumatic tubes. Now, why is that useful? Well, it's very useful because if you centralize trash disposal in that way, you cut your carbon emissions by 90% because you're not running diesel garbage trucks all over the place. If you're not running diesel garbage trucks all over the place, well, then that actually cleans the air in cities. It actually cuts down on traffic in cities. It actually cuts down on upkeep for roads because, right, that the roads get damaged less. It opens up more room on streets for other amenities. It could be benches, it could be trees, it might be sidewalk cafes that increase quality of life. All of this value gets created if we think about how can we actually build a better city. Not just can we do the trash differently or can we cut carbon, but there's all of these co-benefits to realizing if we improve one system, we can improve all these other systems as well. I think taking a view of our cities and the places we live and bringing this kind of holistic understanding to solutions that exist today that can satisfy so many demands and needs and requirements at the same time is possible. And I think we need more of it.
I totally hear you, but who's going to be the one who leads that? Who are the people in place that should be the ones really pushing that forward? Because there's the innovators who are making the tech. Who are the people who are going to say, we need this technology in our city right now?
Well, I would say it's probably leaders who are interested in paying less, taking on less debt and having to raise, not have to raise taxes as much, because all of these types of systems have very strong ROI. In London, I think the payback, they did this around Wembley Stadium. So the whole development, I think it's like 25 acres around Wembley Stadium, has one of these NVAC systems. The payback was in like 5 or 6 years, and suddenly you're saving money versus having to run these other legacy systems. And so everyone should think about this. I'll give you another example. I listened to this podcast called City Climate Corner. It's super wonky. It's these two, one person sits in the Minnesota state legislature, is kind of a climate person, the other works on climate plans for local towns and cities, and so they got City Climate Corner, and they go talk to these people in other smaller cities. And they went to Lincoln, Nebraska. And in Lincoln, the city council came up with a plan they were trying to figure out, okay, we have all this affordable housing, it's kind of a blight. Living in these buildings is not a good experience. Everything's crummy that's going on here. Can we do something about that? And so the city said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to come up with grants on a per unit basis, for depending on how big an apartment building might be. And we're going to give those grants to the owner of that building. Now the grants still have to go toward upfits for those renovations for those units. Now that could be more insulation, could be a better HVAC system, something that's going to improve the quality. And we're going to do it as a grant, because what's going to happen is that building is now going to, the property value on that building is going to go up, which means the property value of all the surrounding buildings is going to go up, which means the tax base is going to go up. We're actually going to recoup that investment. And so the building doesn't have to pay it back as long as they actually go do the renovations. Everybody wins. And they piloted it, it worked, they started rolling it out at a wider scale. So I just listen to that and I think, all right, no knock on Lincoln, Nebraska, but if you can do that in Lincoln, Nebraska, why can't you do that almost everywhere? Right? These solutions just require people to actually, one, understand that they're out there, two, think a little more creatively, and then you can unlock so much value. So the climate benefits, humans benefit, welfare benefits, the city benefits. What is not to like about just thinking a little bit further out of the box than how we think today?
But why don't people do that? Why don't people think outside the box? I guess is the next question. I mean, I can think of a lot of reasons. I think there's special interests involved. I think there's just, when it comes to the physical environment, there's often this feeling of this is how we do things. I think when cities get big, there's a lot of different agendas at play, let's say. From your perspective, are there any things I'm missing?
So I agree with everything you just said. I think there's also a willingness, and we see this in the business world too, a willingness to just settle for mediocrity, right? I don't like this solution that I have today, but I'm used to it, and it feels more painful to change. You still find that cities will change, that there will be people obviously cities will change, there are change makers. The example that springs to mind for me was I had read about this pilot that took place in 5 cities. This was probably, I think it was pre-pandemic. And it was looking at bike lanes and trying to figure out in America, right, you ask which places in the world are the most advanced sustainably. Okay, well, biking in Europe is like such a wonderful treat.
It's incredible.
Biking,
it's like
biking,
an amazing experience.
Yeah, it's amazing. Biking in America, you fear for your life.
Take your life in your
right?
hands. Yeah, exactly.
Take your life in your hands.
We're on the same page there.
So I'd read about this guy, Kyle Wagenschutz, who got his start in this area in Memphis in 2010. He was a bicycle advocate. He had just gotten his master's degree, one of a number of bicycle advocates. He was the one plucked by the new incoming mayor, who said to Kyle, "We've been on Bicycling Magazine's list as the number one, the worst place to bicycle in America, 2 years running. We better not be on there for number 3. Get us off the list." So, Kyle tried a whole bunch of things. By 2015, he's at the White House being honored as a change maker. The city's making progress. A few years later, he works on this plan with New Orleans, Austin, Denver, Pittsburgh, and Providence. So, very different cities, geographically distributed. They don't necessarily have a lot in common. And the plan was to say, in these 5 cities, can we build hundreds of miles of bike lanes in months instead of decades? Right? That's the end. And they did. In 24 months, they collectively built 300 miles of protected, safe bike lanes, the kind of bike lanes you want. So I brought him on the show, and I was how'd you do it? Right? That's incredible. Yeah, we want more of that. Like, how do you do it? So he rattled off a whole bunch of things. But one of the things he said that really struck me, he said, look, we go into cities, and most cities are like this. The mayor wants bike lanes. The city council wants bike lanes. There's budget for bike lanes. Everybody wants bike lanes. And so the projects get announced, and then no bike lanes get built. So we say, okay, why? So he says, well, there's a bunch of reasons. But one of the reasons is that the wheels of government start to grind to a halt, and people show up at city council meetings, and they complain, and then they slow, right? So I said, okay, well, what do you do? He said, well, one, what you don't do is you don't go talk to bicyclists. You don't talk to people who already bike, because they obviously already want what you're trying to do.
Preaching to the choir.
There's just no point. But that's where most people go spend their time, right? So like, what can you do? So, okay, who do you talk to? Well, you talk to people who are never going to be on that bike lane. Go talk to car drivers. Okay, that makes sense. Why do you do that? He's like, because the car drivers are the one at City Hall that are, slowing down, and our job is to clear the runway, clear the path. What do you say to them, Kyle? He's like, well, we tried a million things, but what ended up landing was, one, wouldn't you like to have a more pleasant commute where cyclists weren't weaving in and out of traffic, slowing you down, stressing you? Yes, of course. Okay, well, imagine if they had their own lane, what your commute might feel like. Oh, okay. 2, don't you remember when you were growing up, when life was slower and you knew your neighbors and you could spend more time, kind of out? Yeah, I do remember that. Okay, well, one of the ways we get there is if we carve out lanes for bikes, and so people can actually have a way to get to work that actually makes all traffic flow and calms streets down. Okay, I could see that too. So you can actually kind of have this sort of ode to nostalgia. He came up with the playbook, and it worked, right? It worked. How do cities improve? Well, the goal is to build awareness that there are solutions out there. There are playbooks out there. I mean, that's one of the things, of course, that we're trying to do with Supercool. There are models to point to. I mean, it is happening. Is it happening evenly? No, of course it's not happening evenly, but people are figuring out how to make cities work and build the future that people want.
What Cal was able to do is basically stipulate what's in it for me, talking to those people who are anti-bike lane, appealing to what's in it for them if we actually move forward with that. Trying to be able to add value as much as possible.
Right, and so to your question, is sustainability cool? And as I was thinking about that, it's like, well, I don't know that for some people it has to be, right? That's what's in it for me. I need this to be cool. For other people, it just needs to be something else. So the question always is, does the sustainable solution meet someone's personal self-interest? Does it meet their company's goals and interests? And if it does, you can have a conversation. And if it doesn't, you can't. Mm-hmm. You just simply can't. And we are, I think, living in a moment where, I see companies for whom they really get that, and those are the companies that succeed. And I'll just give you one example. It's a little bit of a strange one, but it does kind of tie into a couple of things here. I recently talked to this guy, Philip Griffiths, who's the team principal, basically the CEO of the Formula E electric racing team for Andretti. Mario Andretti, Michael Andretti, the Andretti family, Andretti Global. Now Formula E is so interesting because this is, it's F1, right? But it's electric racing cars. So what's interesting is today they have a global TV audience of 500 million people. That's a massive audience. That's massive. And when they started, when I asked him about it, he's like, we ran the first race in Beijing in 2014. He's like, we couldn't even do a formation lap when the cars kind of line up before the race starts, because he's like, no car would go over 30 miles per hour because they were just afraid they were going to run their battery out, right? He's like, the tech was terrible. And he's like, and the race was not good. But what did we do? Well, we said, oh, geez, if we're going to build a motorsport racing series that's actually going to compete, we have to iterate like crazy. We have to be willing to take risks. And so they do things like they borrowed from Super Mario Brothers. So they have attack mode, right? So there's a part on the racetrack where if you go over these lines on the racetrack, you go really fast so you get extra boost. And so what does that do for the race? It makes the race way more exciting to watch because he's like,
I'm
you can
hooked
watch
already.
right?
I've
He's
seen
like,
Formula One.
Yeah,
but,
man. He's
that
like,
sounds
you
cooler.
can watch the Formula One race in Monaco, and the backdrop's beautiful, but the race is really boring because once you get in the front of the pack, you're probably not going to lose the lead. It's just really hard to lose the lead. And when Formula E goes to Monaco, there can be 400 position changes in the race. It's incredibly exciting. He's like, plus it's quiet. So we race in city centers, and what does that mean? We appeal to a fan base that doesn't even want to own a car. People show up in Ubers. But they show up, and families show up because their kids aren't going to go deaf, by the sound of the cars. And so we innovate like crazy, and now we get to a format and a location around the world where, in my mind, when you say to me 500 million people are watching Formula E, well, then I think this is the biggest sustainability platform on the planet. And no one's watching it because they want to solve climate change, but they are watching a format that is completely aligned with the solution for climate change. That is powerful, right? And that is purely about self-interest and entertainment and designing something that's underpinned by sustainability and clean tech and climate and all that stuff. It doesn't have to put it in your face because it's what the whole thing's about in the first place, Right.
So you get those synergies, right? You get entertainment, but it just happens to be sustainable. It's quiet, and so people approach the event with a different energy or with a different attitude than if it was a bunch of loud, gas-guzzling Formula One cars. Let me ask you a question then on that vein. What is the greatest bang for your buck sustainability change that most cities could implement right now?
Probably think about it in a couple different ways. What I mentioned in terms of how you think about your trash, I feel like that's table stakes at this point. It's hard for any city that's capable of actually raising bonds and raising some money should just probably do that because it's going to pay for itself. Cities don't all have the same challenges. And so it's not necessarily one thing. But in a lot of, let's say, more modern cities, right, you're dealing with housing. In Bristol, in the UK, Marvin Rees, when he was the mayor, most of these cities don't have the money to deal with housing, though. So, and not a lot of cities actually can go raise money on their own. It's very difficult to access climate financing. And so he led in the UK, in Europe, one of the largest public-private partnerships to bring in outside private companies to actually work on housing together. And whether it's heat pumps or whether it's, upgrading and retrofitting and insulation, but together going out to the private sector and engaging the private sector as partners. Not a lot of cities do that, but that's not everyone's problem. I recently spoke to this guy, incredible guy, Jaime Pumarejo, who was the former mayor of Barranquilla, Colombia. It's just different because Colombians have like 1/16 the carbon footprint of Americans. Like for them to be thinking, oh, we got to cut our carbon footprint, or like our buildings are using, it's just too much energy. It's like it's nonsensical, right? Just given where they are. What they need to do is work on preserving biodiversity, potentially increasing, the natural landscape. And so Jaime went to their sister cities, Tampa. He went to New York City, then he went to London. And what he saw in London was this tree-lined streets in London, streets intentionally planted to make them, tree-lined, of course, beautiful. But what that does is it raises your property values by 15% on average, which raises the tax base. And so then he said, well, geez, okay, now I can go back to Barranquilla and explain to, all my colleagues who don't understand nature, why it's in their economic interest to plant trees, because there's an ROI. And so they did. They planted lots and lots of trees. It's something that paid for itself in 7 to 8 years. And then they said, we're going to do parks. And they've put 300 parks in place. Like, I think there was some study, I don't know if it was the World Wildlife Fund, I can't remember who, maybe the World Economic Forum, said someone in Barranquilla today, it's about 1.5 million people, no one has more than an 8-minute walk to a natural space. And those parks also have an ROI, because around the parks come shops and the whole neighborhood comes to life. And then they also pay for themselves. And so there's no one size fits all for what cities should do, but what cities can do is think about what their challenges are and come up with very, much more creative playbooks than they're using today to enhance quality of life and cut carbon at the same time.
Those are great examples, Josh. I mean, I think the question when it's about cities is one thing. On the flip side of the coin, a lot of individuals feel like we need to protect the planet, we need to account for climate change, we need to create a more sustainable lifestyle for all of us. But the problem seems so large and so challenging that sometimes it can feel frustrating, like that you can't affect it. So I'm going to ask you, what are some small frameworks that individuals can employ to actually affect climate change and actually make a difference?
I understand that feeling. I understand, the feeling of, is there anything I can do? And, I see it both. I see it kind of two sides of the coin here. On the one hand, I think, yeah, you can actually do the kinds of things we're talking about today. You can go look and say, what is going to enhance your quality of life in your home? Do you want a battery backup storage? There's a company called Pila, P-I-L-A, that's coming out with this really cool battery that apartment owners can get. So if the lights go out or something happens in their home, or if they actually have some control, they can get this really elegant backup that's in their house. But I think that there are tools to use your finances better than by default what we do today. And when you look at where you bank, most of the major banks, in fact, probably today, nearly all of them, except maybe a Swiss bank or something, are pretty much all underwriting fossil fuels. And now with this administration in place, like gloves are off, like, we're back, baby. So if you're, so where you park your money can make a difference. There's a bank, I actually think it's called Climate First Bank, where you can push your cash there. They will loan it out to solar projects, projects that align with what you would like to see if you're asking the question. There's a company that I just came across called Climatize that does a similar thing for investments, that democratizes investing into solar power projects where you would get a return, and they have lots of vetted projects. And so those are just two examples. It's not just about buy this, don't buy that. I think it's really about, look, where are you putting your cash, right? Where are you parking your cash by default, just because you think you haven't considered other options, where you actually could put that cash to work for you, and you could be doing good for the planet while you sleep.
Never thought of that, actually. It's fascinating. Yeah. So much of this is about financing and how we, how these technologies, how these innovations actually get paid for. Okay, I'm going to close it off with the last question, but it's been a fascinating conversation so far, Josh. We titled this podcast Most Modern. We feel, when it comes to the built environment, that we're in a very interesting moment. It's not clearly defined quite yet. And I think that you're probably feeling the same thing about climate change and about sustainability, which is why you do Supercool. So in your own terms, how would you describe the moment that we're in right now if we were to say in 30 years, look back on it?
This is not going to be a very original idea, because the phrase is actually a podcast run by a guy named Keith Zackheim. It's called The Age of Adoption. And Keith is the CEO of a company called Antenna. It's a really cool advertising marketing agency. They have a lot of climate tech companies, which is how I've come to know him and his company. But I think that's where we are. I think we're in the age of adoption. I think that we are not in this age of dawning awareness that we have a problem. And I think that we have entered a moment from a climate perspective where, and as I mentioned today, we're talking trillions of dollars are being invested into these industries. We've had over a decade of climate tech companies raising venture capital, getting to their Series B stage and beyond, which is, you have to have commercial viability at that point. Not all of them succeed, a lot of them fail, but a lot of them are in market today. And so there are solutions to adopt. And then kind of to this last point we talked about in terms of cities, there are 15,000 cities around the world that have climate action plans in place today. They are turning at least segments of their cities into living laboratories for change. So there is this moment of adoption, understanding that solutions are here. They are underway. My view is they're underrepresented in the media in terms of what we hear about, what we understand is out there. But that's the moment. It's the age of adoption.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Josh, for joining the show. If listeners want to hear more about you, about your work, about Supercool, where should they look?
The best place to find us is at our website, getsuper.cool. That's the launchpad. Find the podcast, our weekly newsletter. You can find us on YouTube. I am most active social media-wise on LinkedIn. We are on all channels, but if anyone listening wants to connect with me personally, you can find me there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Potter and Josh. I'm really excited to continue to follow all these innovations that you've been tracking, and thank you for bringing them to our attention.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate the conversation, the questions, and kind of the challenging a little bit to go a little deeper. So that was really fun.
Most modern.
Most modern.
Most modern.
Most modern.
모스트 포던 팟캐스트